Our next item is this is a preview of our environmental responsibility and sustainability work. Dr. Swift.
Thank you, Madam President and trustees. We've long been looking forward to moving forward as the board has set a goal with our environmental responsibility and sustainability efforts. As we see these efforts, we see them directly attached to our critical mission of student achievement. And we see that because we know that even our schools, our physical plant schools, can become a teachable moment for students as they're engaging with their own environment and learning how to save and to conserve resources. We are looking also at conservation of resources, quite frankly, as a part of our fiduciary responsibility. We've looked at the budget tonight, and Mr. Lauzzana will be sharing with us ideas that not only will be good for the earth, but they will save us quite a bit of money. So that is a second leg of the stool. The third area that I'm reminded of is the deep resonance with community values in our long history in Ann Arbor of being environmentally responsible. We also, trustees, I want to share, understand now just from our spring tours that environmental sustainability will be a part of emerging of the strategic plan data. It's there, it's a clear pattern, and we're excited about that. One of the biggest steps that we've made this year in moving forward as a district that has a heart toward environmental responsibility and sustainability was bringing Mr. Emile Lauzzana onto our team. He is, by all folks who know him, one of the experts in the state on helping schools and school districts to be environmentally responsible. He's launched our Environmental Sustainability Advisory Group, and I'm really proud. They've met just a few times over April and May and June, and yet they're already off to a really great start. So the goal this evening, trustees, is not to bring any formal plan. This is just an initial exploration, a little preview, and I'm very excited this evening for you to hear more about what Mr. Lauzzana is thinking, and we're excited to hear your feedback and input as we start off in this work. Very good, Mr. Lauzzana.
Thank you, Dr. Swift. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and present to this board this evening. Environmental sustainability has been a passion of my life from a very young age, and engaging schools in that work, especially given the pressing challenges of climate change and the long play that the challenges of that present to us, engaging the youth in finding solutions for that is a place that I feel there's a lot of value and a lot of good impact to happen. So the presentation is going to overview, we're going to sort of establish and reaffirm that climate change is real now, and it will be even more real for future generations. Briefly discuss approaches and responses to climate change. We're going to talk about the advisory committee and how we're using that as a community input tool. And then we'll review, overview some of the impacts that classroom environment optimization has on learning, or learning environments, and then a preview of some of the next steps that we're looking at. So this is from about 10 years ago. This is a slide showing where Michigan will be in terms of climate by the year 2095. So the blue is where our winters will be, and the red is where our summers will likely be. So in 70 years or so, it'll be very unusual to have snow in southern Michigan. And in Arkansas, I can tell you I spent one summer in Arkansas. It is extremely hot and dry in Arkansas. So we have a lot of things to think about as these changes start to occur. Michigan has more coastline than any other lower 48 state, 2 times more coastline than Florida, 4 times more coastline in California. We have fresh water that's the envy of the world, more fresh water than just about any other place you can find. We're highly dependent and engaged in manufacturing, and we have more engineers in Michigan per capita than any other state in the country. We also have one of the most diverse agricultural bases, second only to California. We can grow just about anything in Michigan right now. We can grow cherries, corn, wheat, you name it, onions. I think somebody said green beans the other day to me. We can grow all this. So what happens as we move to these new climates? What happens to that agriculture? What does that mean for industry? How does that impact our water resource? So this is another older slide. This is from a series of studies that were predicting sea level rise. This was from about 10 years ago. And they had observed, you can see in the black there at the bottom, the observations to date, and then several studies that looked at what those predictions, where they predicted sea level would go. This really could be incidents of severe weather, it could be drought, it could be, in Michigan we have these torrential downpours that seem to be happening more and more every year. We've had more 100-year floods in the last 5 years than I care to recall. And so, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my kids, right? That impact that is happening to me is relatively manageable. It's something we can deal with. The impact that my children will see in their lifetime is way more significant, and the impact on my grandchildren is off the chart, right? So what does that mean for us as a public school system, teaching a next generation to handle these issues? So the three key responses that a lot of people in the sort of environmental sustainability space talk about in dealing with this are mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Mitigation is the most easily understood and commonly used strategy, and that is, reducing emissions, right? Turning off lights, electric cars, solar panels, better windows, those kinds of things. Adaptation is, how do we deal with it when we have a heat wave in the last week of May, and we have buildings that were designed for a different era and a different climate, right? So how do we adapt to that? And resilience is, how do we deal with, how do we recover, how do we bounce back from something like that event, or from a flood, or from any number of things, and how do we build our communities and our systems to be resilient so that we can take that heavy flood and then bounce back from that and continue with what we're doing. And a tool that we use to analyze solutions and prioritize is to look at the difference between a degenerative cycle and a regenerative cycle. A degenerative cycle removes resources and energy from a system. A regenerative cycle adds resources and energy to that system. So I'll use food systems as an example. So a degenerative food cycle is one where, we're sort of in it right now. The tomatoes that I buy in the winter are from Mexico or California. So there's a high input of fertilizers into that. There's a high transportation cost, and there's a degradation of the soil because of the way that this mass agriculture is carried out. So you're removing from the cycle and you're causing more climate change. A regenerative food system cycle, and there's also the food waste piece on that. The regenerative cycle would be one that's more local, that creates jobs in the local economy, that replenishes the soil, that composts the food waste back into the system. So that's one example of the difference between a degenerative and a regenerative cycle. And I believe there's always a solution that gets us to the regenerative side of things. Another area that's of great interest is biomimicry or biomimetic design. So this is kind of the difference between learning about nature or learning from nature, and asking that question, what would nature do to solve this particular situation that I'm in? An example would be cooling, right? So we need to cool our buildings. So how does a tree do that, right? How does a tree cool itself? Well, a tree has roots. They go down into the ground, and it carries liquids and things up through itself, and then its trees transpire that heat back out into the atmosphere. It's a natural cooling cycle that they use. It's very similar to a geothermal system. which taps the earth and pulls, well, essentially pushes heat into the earth and brings the coldness up. And there's lots of ways to look at our design problems. What would a natural system, an organism, do to solve the problem? And there's tons of really cool examples with new underwater glues that have been derived from studying how a mussel attaches itself to a rock in the ocean. If you've ever tried to pull one of those off, it's extremely difficult. Well, they've mimicked that chemistry, and now they have underwater glues that are non-toxic that are 10 times stronger than anything that they had previously. And there's tons of examples of that mimetic design. So yes, we've formed the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee. We've met a couple times. We've done some online work. And out of that work, we have formed these 5 topic teams, and we'll look a little bit at each one of those. We've formalized our membership. Our first meeting, these are the members of the committee. And our first meeting, we filled up, it must have been 10 or 12 sheets, with all these ideas. And we threw it all up there. And then using the, I'm new to it, so I'm forgetting. Trigo, yes. Process, we narrowed that, we kind of, put things into buckets, and that's where we ended up with these 5 areas to focus on. And then we did a survey in each of those areas from all of this list of things to sort of prioritize initially. This is early on. The priorities may shift based on feedback from the board, more feedback from community, feedback from schools over time. But so we surveyed these, and it's a 1 through 10 ranking, and we looked at 3 categories: student outcomes, environmental impact, and then the impact on budget and staff time. And you'll see the numbers on budget and staff time are inverted. So a high impact on budget and staff would be a low number. So it's sort of reversed that way. But the blue highlights on these next few slides are the highest rated items in each category, and then the green highlights are the second and third. You'll see here, implementing a district-wide sustainable schools program was rated high for environmental impact, and it was a tie with document our current school-based initiatives. I think there's a lot out there that we're not aware of at the district that we could learn from and pull into a district-wide sustainable schools program. Also highly rated on student outcomes was what Dr. Swift mentioned earlier, and what I was highly engaged with in Detroit was using school campus buildings and as a learning living laboratory. So we have this wonderful building, these grounds, all of these things. How can we learn from the electricity profile of the building, or the natural system behind the building, or the food system coming through our cafeteria? Also using students to educate the community was seen as something that would be of value. There's a lot of these, so I'm not going to read every single one, but just read a few highlights. On building energy and water use, highly rated, of course, was conservation, as well as building envelope improvements, and focusing on the low-hanging fruit, those things that have high return on investments, like upgrading lighting, control systems, things like that. On waste reduction, there was a recognition that we have a pretty good foundation of a recycling program. It could use some enhancement. It could use some love and attention to kind of get it back up to a higher standard, and that would be the best for student outcomes and for environmental impact. And I was previously at Detroit Public Schools for 5 years and ran a sustainability program and did a bunch of other not so fun stuff. Like manage utilities and all that. But we surveyed the students every year, and which of the 30 or so little projects that we had them doing did they like the best? And there was energy conservation and gardening and recycling and a couple of other things. And recycling was always the #1 rated by the students in terms of what they enjoyed in the program. And second was the gardening program. And my wheelhouse, energy, was always last. but we did it anyways. But recycling is really a great way to engage the students because it's so hands-on, it's palpable, you can feel it, you can tell what that impact is. And also reusable water bottles, and that's something that we've got a commitment, and we're starting to implement water bottle filling stations at all of our schools to promote that usage. On our indoor environment, one of the things that was highly rated by the committee was understanding and managing the indoor environment, classroom environment, to maximize student health, well-being, teacher satisfaction, and all those things. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Developing a formal green cleaning policy and reducing our chemical use. And I will say I think we're doing pretty well on those two, but we can do better. Site and grounds, we had a lot of ideas that came out. And one of the most highly rated ones was increase our native landscaping. But what I really like on this one is enhancing the school gardens. I feel that's a really great way to, there's so much science that can go into that. There's so many good life lessons involved with that, from work ethic to eating healthy and all these other things, that enhancing those school gardens is a great suggestion. And so you have all that in your packet, and you can look at that and at your leisure. The next thing I'd like to talk about is some work I've been doing for a while with a colleague of mine at the Ecology Center, linking academic performance with building performance. So what's the connection there between those two things? And we're in this really amazing space. I've been at this for a long time, and we're moving from the place of anecdote to the place of evidence, to the place of sort of qualitative feelings to quantitative data. We've long felt that temperature and comfort and lighting levels and all these things and air quality impact performance, satisfaction, and well-being. We haven't had a lot of studies to support that. Thankfully, there are quite a few of them out now, and Harvard in 2016 put together a compendium that brought all this research together into one place and summarized it. And their main areas to focus on were how student health impacts student thinking and ultimately student performance. So I'm going to overview some of the studies that are in that document. The framework centers on these 5 things. How do students hear? How do they breathe? How do they see, and how do they feel? And ultimately, how does that impact how they think and how they learn? So on hearing, there's a lot of research that talks about reverberation time. So you know how the adults in Peanuts always have that wah, 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 wah talk and you can't hear them? Well, that's simulating a high reverberation rate environment. So that's where the sound is bouncing back and forth in the space in such a way that you hear multiple versions of the same sound and it's difficult to hear. So high reverberation time and low and background noise. So if you have a higher reverberation time and a higher background noise, the studies are telling us that decreases your short-term memory and that decreases your speech perception. So how we breathe is sort of the same thing. In terms of having these studies now, we know there are a lot of toxins in our environment. Indoor air has been shown to be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. And research is tending to focus on ventilation rate, so that's how much fresh oxygen you're bringing through the space. As the kids are creating CO2, you need to refresh that air. And then how effectively are you filtering the air? How are you removing all these particulates and toxins and other things? And it's been shown that managing ventilation and filtration impact task speed, average daily attendance, and proficiency. So for instance, this study conducted in Denmark looks at outdoor air supply. So this is bringing in outdoor air. And as they increase the amount of outdoor air, they see higher performance on tests. So they set up environments, they do different things, they measure, they give the students worksheets and other things to do. And the more oxygen that they have, the higher they perform. This study of U.S. fifth graders, they recorded a 3% increase in the proportion of students passing standardized tests for each 2 cubic feet per minute of air increase. So the current code standard is 15 cubic feet per minute per student. As the filters in the building become clogged, you're not bringing in as much air. Some systems are under-designed, some are over-designed. We have a lot of old buildings. Modern buildings have methods of actually measuring the CO2 concentration in a space, and as the CO2 concentration increases, the ventilation rates are increased to compensate for that. So this is another study that's looking at the effect of ventilation, both for oxygen levels and particulate control. They've also studied the impact on ventilation and filtration on illness and found that significant reduction in things like flu, asthma, other respiratory illnesses, colds, even headaches and things like that, all significantly correlated to the indoor air quality. So how do we see? One of the things that we know is that children depend more on sight as a learning method than adults. So that's a very important thing for students and young people. It's been one of the longest things that's been studied is the impact of daylight in views and how that can increase student performance. And in an optimized learning environment relative to the lighting, they've shown up to a 21% increase in learning rates. And part of the really emerging research that's happening now is around your circadian rhythms and how they are tied to your lighting environment. So one of the things that's relatively easy to do and that we've, school districts and others are doing is moving to LED lights. As you move to LED lights, you're able to change the color temperature of the light. So when you go into Home Depot, there's the orangey light, and then there's the more bluey white light. Well, it's been found that you get a 10 to 15% increase in visual acuity and reading comprehension in a bluer light. So that's this image is simulating what your eye is seeing in those two different environments. Same thing, they queue up a bunch of kids, they give them all the same worksheet, and they put them in randomly into different rooms with different lighting environments, and they see that kind of a difference just from changing the color of the light. And that's something that you can do as you retrofit LEDs. Older lights tend to be in the 3,000 to the 3,500 light degrees Kelvin. Newer LEDs might be 4,000, 4,500, or 5,000, moving you up into that bluer spectrum. So the circadian rhythm research and new technologies that can kind of capture the benefits here are really talking about the fact that we, 200 years ago, essentially lived outdoors. And all of our lighting was happening from the sun, and that was sort of about the extent of it. We now spend 90% of our time indoors. And what has been found through this research is that our bodies are regulated by color temperature and color and lighting intensity. So in the early morning and in the evening, that orangey light kind of moves our hormones and our body function around to a place where we're calmer, we're a little getting ready for bed, that kind of thing. As you move into the blue light, your internal mechanisms switch around, different things are produced, other things are turned off, and you become much more alert and aware of what's going on and ready for high brain function and that kind of thing. So dynamic lighting is a technology that allows you to control not only the light intensity, so how much light, but also the color temperature, what color it is. And these new technologies allow a teacher to control mood and behavior based on these different lighting settings. So for instance, you have a class full of middle school students, it's 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, half the heads are on the desk and everybody's really tired. You can put them into the noonday lighting environment and that will wake them up and make them more alert. If you have that same bunch of students, and they're just coming back from gym class or lunch, and they're all hyped up, and nobody's paying attention, a lot of people goofing off. You can put them into the lower color temperature environment and actually calm that classroom down, in part through the way that their body is reacting to those lighting environments. And so this study that's referenced here, albeit it is by a lighting manufacturer, they found a 33% increase in student performance. But I will say I have some of this in my little office at home, and it is noticeable. You crank that thing all the way up into the white light, your brain starts to move, and you bring it down, and you can feel the calmness coming in you. And so finally, how you feel in an environment is also a consideration, and thermal comfort and performance have long been, again, in this sort of anecdotal space, but there's starting to be this realization that staying in the comfort zone, which is indicated on this is a chart, it's called the psychometric chart. On the bottom is temperature, on the vertical is moisture. And so you're looking at the combination of temperature and humidity, because we all know 90 degrees and super humid feels different than 90 degrees and super dry, right? And so that comfort zone is where we've determined, based on a balance of those things, where humans tend to feel comfortable. And so this is what was happening to us in May. This was conducted at Kansas State, and they did the same sort of simulated tasks, and they found approximately your performance speed dropped by 1% for each degree Fahrenheit of increased temperature past 68 degrees. So as you're coming up here into the 78 degree space, your performance has dropped off significantly due to that heat. And that has to do with, just essentially how that's impacting your cognitive function. So here are some next steps that we're exploring as ways to engage some of these ideas. So how you hear, we're already well along the way to sound field systems in most classrooms, and that is a way to alleviate those issues of reverberation and background noise. How we breathe, we're getting into making sure that our air filters are all working properly and that there's a preventive maintenance schedule to get those changed out on a regular basis, and starting to study the ventilation rates and seeing where we are with some of this. How we see, we'll be looking at LED lighting and possibly how can we can, because LED lighting is a low return on investment, or so you recoup your money on LED lights, and then you're cash flow positive relatively short period of time. Solar is kind of the opposite. You recover your money more slowly, so are there ways we can do those together or independently, but to help to get to that see space, how students are seeing, and then how we feel. We all know we need to do something about climate control in this district, and so how are we going to attack that with the cognition or with the understanding that we're ultimately trying to create these optimal classroom environments for learning. And then on the think and learn side, how can we, as was mentioned earlier, think about that sustainability curriculum and how it engages the building and the grounds and all of those things. So here are a few links. U.S. Green Building Council Center for Green Schools, they helped put together the Harvard study. They put together a lot of really great resources on their website. There's the study I mentioned, Schools for Health. U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy Schools Initiative. Really awesome stuff. Some regenerative schools information there, a couple of sites, and then a nice case study video of a zero energy school. So in closing, environmental sustainability at the end of the day to me is about the people, the conversations they have, the ideas they generate. It's about the systems that they make from those conversations, and ultimately the ecology that they create. So thank you for this opportunity to present this, and I look forward to answering some questions and working on this over, in the months and years ahead.
Thank you so much. We've been looking forward to this work, and we're so glad you've started. So more to come, I know, but thank you, Emile. Appreciate it.
Thank you.